Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says that literacy levels among South African pupils are declining and government is concerned. Today, she outlined developments in the education sector following a study that exposed the poor reading and interpretation skills of grade 4 pupils. eNCA's Heidi Giokos was there, and she joins us now live in studio to give us more details. Heidi, quite a concerning report that was released in terms of the reading for understanding with pupils in South Africa. What did the minister say?
Yes, so I think it's important to highlight the fact that alarming stats came out, Motshekga, about a month or two ago, indicating that grade 4 learners are reading, but they're not reading for comprehension. So what they're reading, they're not understanding what they're reading. So they can understand that Motshekga is eating, or they can read Motshekga is eating, but they're not understanding what it means when they read Motshekga is eating, which is very worrying, because when you are in grade 4, you're at a level where you should be understanding what you are reading, and it should be comprehended. But according to the minister, a lot of this decline that we are seeing in the literacy and understanding of grade 4 learners has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. And while many might frown upon this and say, can we stop blaming everything on the pandemic, it obviously had a massive impact in terms of teaching and learning. And the minister highlighting the fact that the actual report that was conducted, it's an international benchmark, and oftentimes international standards don't really apply here. We have different dynamics in South Africa, we have different languages, and we'll hear about that in a short while. But let's listen to what the minister had to say about the pandemic having a severe impact. And according to South African benchmark, yes, there is a decline, but it's not as severe as what we saw in terms of that pupils survey that was conducted and released. Let's listen to the minister.
What confirms that South Africa, like virtually all countries, saw lower primary reading competencies declining due to the pandemic related to school disruptions. And the magnitude of our decline relating to the pandemic does not come as a surprise. South Africa was amongst the countries most actively gauging impacts on learning outcomes during the pandemic. And the results we see now in pupils are in line with the earlier findings that we did say as a department. I think when we make the presentation, you'll also see what we also had picked up as the learning losses that had occurred because of the pandemic.
So Heidi, you mentioned language a short while ago before throwing to that little clip from the minister. What does the study say? Does it make a difference if children are probably taught in their mother tongue?
Yes, so that has come out quite extensively, especially with South Africa's benchmark. And I must just emphasize that girls are 1.5 years ahead than boys, which is very interesting. I was very proud of the little girl in me. But that is also coming up in terms of the languages. For example, I posed the question to the minister and I said, I don't really understand, are learners struggling to understand and comprehend because of the language barrier? For example, my home language is not English, and I actually did struggle when I was in school, because you're being taught one thing at home in your home language, and when you go to school it's a completely different language. And you might understand, and I use the example of, you might understand what an octopus is in your home language, but when you go to school you're not being taught in your home language, so it's difficult for you to comprehend and put the two together. We of course have 11 official languages in the country. Not everybody speaks and understands the same language, even in school. And this is why you're also seeing, for example, in the Western Cape, it's the province that's ahead from all other provinces, because it's either English or Afrikaans or Xhosa, which is, it's being very clear that the learners are understanding better because they are being taught in either those 3 languages. Even in KZN, it's a province that's advanced in terms of all the other provinces, because isiZulu is one of the languages that's also being taught. So the issue around languages is being picked up, that learners that are being taught in English, for example, but speak a different language at home, they are struggling to comprehend, they are struggling to understand what they're being taught, and the teacher as well. The teacher might not be able to, for example, teach in isiZulu or whatever language, African language it might be at this point, and then they obviously immediately divert to English, and that's where the issue comes up, and that's where you're seeing the drop in terms of literacy and understanding. Let's listen to one of the Basic Education Department officials on that.
South African learners do find the international passage is difficult to answer, both for literary and informational text. But it's international passages. So, and with the respect to the processes of reading comprehension, the scores on reading comprehension in African home languages observed across the different studies are lower than expected, and that's going to be our focus of attention going forward. But there is some contextual factors, and COVID did play a significant and had a substantial negative effect on learners' scores. And the effect was even more pronounced in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities where there is insufficient home resources and those that are attending schools in more rural provinces. The green shoots and the positives is that our national assessment data from ELNA and our systemic evaluation show positive growth points, and there are green shoots in emerging reading and foundational comprehension. So as learners progress to the different grades, this incremental growth is consistent in reading comprehension skills.
So after releasing all these statistics and, all these findings about our dire state of education, really, to put it mildly, what is the department saying it's doing about it?
Yes, so I think for context purposes, for example, we saw that the Gauteng Education MEC had indicated a while ago that the reason this is happening is because of early childhood development. And we must know that that department was moved over to the basic education department late last year. So it was always under social development. So as usual, government's tactic is to have the blame game and blame this department or that department. But at the end of the day, Motshekga, if you have the majority of grade 4 learners unable to read with comprehension, that is a massive alarm bell, because what happens when they start moving into other grades? It needs to start at early childhood developments. But the department has indicated that they are trying their very best to pinpoint the issues. Already they've identified the fact that African languages, it is a problem, and they need to figure out how they're going to navigate through this. The minister speaking about looking at policies and re-implementing or reintroducing certain policies to accommodate for this, because you cannot have a situation where a learner is at home and they speak isiZulu and then they go to school and then they're being taught in a different language and they are expected to just fit in and understand what's being taught to them in English. There needs to be a balance, and it's going to be a very difficult one because we have 11 official languages in the country. So how do you find a balance between that? But the minister says they do understand what some of those issues are. They are trying to play catch up in terms of what was lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. But from my understanding from that briefing, which was very technical, it's got a lot to do with the issue around languages and how they find a balance with the teachers and the learners, and just to make sure that learners understand this comprehension thing. Another thing the minister said was, when it's a child's birthday, stop buying a child sweets and cakes and toys, buy them books so that they can read. But that also falls on the government to perhaps build more libraries and ensure that kids have access to books, which I think is very important in terms of them having access to that education.
All right, Heidi Giokos with that report. Let's leave it there for now. And we all remember during those lockdowns, it was quite worrying to see some pupils who are from affluent areas, who go to affluent schools, had a better chance than those who were in rural areas and townships who didn't have the type of technology and access to teachers that others did.